Hello and welcome to Tier 5 of the Women Serial Killer Iceberg chart. This is the final tier. This is the worst of the worst. If you've made it this far, I assume you know what an iceberg chart is. In prior videos, I did the whole definition and everything, but I'll just throw up a little quick thing here. If you don't know what an iceberg chart is, being truly honest, I had to film this video probably 4 times now. I know in other videos I have warned that things get darker and more disturbing, but really this is truly next level shit. So if you are not in the right headspace, please feel no obligation to watch this. I have other videos that are much more lighthearted if you want to check those out. But like I said, this is like round 4 or 5, I can't remember, so I'm just gonna jump right into the chart. Patty Cannon. Patty Cannon was the leader of a criminal gang in 19th century America. The gang was responsible for the kidnapping and murder of enslaved as well as free black individuals. Technically, according to the FBI, she is not actually a serial killer, and I really have tried to stick to the technical definition, but Patty Cannon, in my opinion, is certainly a serial killer. She is a fucking monster. Patty Cannon and her gang operated along the Maryland-Delaware border, and this was basically like a brutal human trafficking ring. And as I mentioned, she was kidnapping and murdering free and enslaved black individuals, but the majority, from what I understand, were children. One thing I read that disturbed me deeply was that Patty Cannon and her gang reportedly kidnapped 3 times as many people as those who escaped through the Underground Railroad in Delaware. To make this even more disturbing, Cannon and her gang would often disguise themselves as part of the Underground Railroad and used that as a way to lure in victims. Their crimes came to light in 1829 when a tenant farmer found human remains on Cannon's property. This prompted a wider investigation and a wider search. They went on to find multiple bodies of adults and children. She was arrested but died before she could stand trial. Some say she poisoned herself, others say it was natural causes. Either way, there really was no justice for the victims. Constance Fisher. Constance Fisher was a Maine woman who was responsible for the death of her 6 children across 2 separate incidents. In 1954, she drowned her 3 young children, believing she was sending them to heaven. Fisher was institutionalized, but was later released after being deemed recovered. However, in 1966, she repeated the tragic act, drowning her 3 remaining children. Fisher was recommitted to an institution after this second incident and took her own life in 1973. Charlene Gallego. Charlene Gallego, born Charlene Adele Williams in 1956, became infamous as one half of a serial killer duo alongside her husband Gerald Gallego. Between 1978 and 1980, the couple abducted, assaulted, and murdered at least 10 victims, primarily young women in California and Nevada. Charlene, who had a very privileged upbringing, met Gerald in 1977, and their relationship quickly descended into a sadomasochistic partnership. Under Gerald's influence, Charlene assisted in luring victims into their van with the promise of work or rides, leading to their tragic deaths. The couple's crime spree ended in 1980 when they were apprehended after a witness noted their license plate during an abduction. In exchange for testifying against Gerald, Charlene received a reduced sentence of 16 years and 8 months and was released in 1997. Gerald was sentenced to death but died of cancer in 2002 while on death row. Marie Fikáčková. Marie Fikáčková was a neonatal nurse in Czechoslovakia who was convicted of murdering 2 newborns in 1960, though she claimed to have killed at least 10 since 1957. Arrested after 2 infants died under her care in a single day, she confessed to brutally assaulting babies, cracking their skulls and breaking their bones in fits of rage. She blamed her actions on uncontrollable outbursts, triggered by crying, and even suggested her Czech victims were revenge for insults about her German heritage. I did not know newborns could speak, let alone insult someone. So that's interesting. Despite admitting to multiple murders, she was only convicted for 2, as poor hospital oversight made earlier deaths impossible to verify. Fikáčková was executed by hanging in 1961. Rhonda Belle Martin. Rhonda Belle Martin, a seemingly ordinary waitress from Alabama, poisoned 5 of her own children, her mother, and 2 husbands with rat poison, though she denied 2 of the children's deaths. Her last victim, her stepson turned 5th husband, survived but was left paralyzed, which led to her arrest. Prosecutors suspected she killed for insurance money, but she claimed to have no motive, only a morbid obsession with receiving sympathy cards. In 1957, she was executed in the electric chair, quietly reciting the 23rd Psalm. Before her death, she requested that doctors study her brain to find out why she committed the murders, writing, quote, "I can't understand it, for I had no reason whatsoever," unquote. Irina Gaidamachuk. Between 2002 and 2010, Irina Gaidamachuk terrorized elderly women in Sverdlovsk Oblast, Russia, posing as a social worker to gain entry into their homes before brutally murdering them with an axe or a hammer. What was her motive, you ask? Well, alcohol. She killed to rob her victims for vodka money as her husband refused to fund her addiction. Despite police assuming the killer was a man, a surviving victim's testimony led to Gaidamachuk's arrest. She confessed but later recanted, claiming mental illness. Found legally sane, she was convicted of 17 murders, but sentenced to just 20 years, which was the maximum for women under Russian law. Megan Huntsman. For nearly a decade, Megan Huntsman carried out a horrifying series of crimes, secretly murdering 6 of her newborns between 1996 and 2006. She either strangled or suffocated the infants before hiding their tiny bodies in boxes in her garage. The truth only came to light in 2014 when her ex-husband discovered the remains while cleaning out their former home. Huntsman, a methamphetamine user, admitted she killed the babies because she, quote, didn't want them, unquote. Shockingly, the father of the children was unaware of the pregnancies or the killings. I can kind of understand not being aware of the killings, but I just don't buy that you don't know that your wife is pregnant, especially with 6 newborns over a decade. You didn't notice that half of that time in 10 years that your wife was pregnant? That is crazy to me. She pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to at least 30 years in prison, leaving behind 3 surviving children who were spared her horrific spree. Adrienne Moton. This is a tough one for me, so I apologize if I just sort of blow through it. I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way. I'm still gonna give you information, but I don't feel comfortable going into too many details, so I apologize for that. But Adrienne Moton was an accomplice to Dr. Kermit Gosnell, the notorious Philadelphia abortion provider who was convicted of several counts of murder. The clinic that Moton, I really don't care how to pronounce her name, the clinic she worked at in West Philadelphia was, to say it was unsafe and unsanitary is the understatement of the century. But at that facility, they performed late-stage abortions. The clinic's shocking conditions included blood-stained furniture, unsanitary medical equipment, and unsterilized instruments, creating a breeding ground for abuse and neglect. Many babies that were born alive during these procedures were killed post-birth by doing something they referred to as snipping. And snipping is where they would cut the baby's spinal cord with scissors. The clinic was also a front for criminal activities, as well as, exploiting vulnerable women with unsafe medical procedures that violated medical ethics on a massive scale. The entire operation was exposed in 2010 when a police raid revealed the bodies of several babies and the shocking extent of Gosnell's malpractice, leading to his conviction for murder and Moton's guilty plea for her involvement in the atrocities. Now, I know there are many people that were involved, but if you're wondering why I am speaking about Adrienne Moton specifically in this, she admitted to cutting the necks of 10 babies. This is after the babies were born. This is not a fetus situation. This is babies being delivered, and then Moton was also involved in racketeering activities at the clinic as well. It feels really irrelevant to even bring that part up when talking about all of the other monstrous shit she did, but some fucking how. She was only sentenced to 11 and a half to 23 months in prison, something like that. After serving her time in prison, Moton decided to become a pretty radical anti-choice activist. So, a lot to unpack there. But I don't want to, so I'm just gonna move right along. Elisabeth Wiese. Elisabeth Wiese was a German serial killer active in the late 19th century. She was convicted of murdering 5 children in Hamburg between 1903 and 1904. Wiese, who worked as a servant, poisoned the children using toxic substances under the guise of caring for them. The amount of children that died under her care was obviously very bizarre and prompted an investigation. I couldn't find any concrete motives she had. It seemed to be a mix of personal grievances, financial gain, and possibly the desire to rid herself of the children. It was very confusing. But apparently that is what she expressed during her trial. Wiese was arrested, tried, and executed by guillotine in 1905. Marie No. For nearly 2 decades, Marie No was thought to be a grieving mother, plagued by unimaginable tragedy, losing 8 of her 10 children between 1949 and 1968, all initially attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. However, in 1998, after renewed investigation, No confessed to smothering 4 of her babies and claimed she couldn't remember what happened to the others, what she did to the others, her own children, babies. Ultimately, and infuriatingly, No struck a plea deal, avoiding prison and receiving 20 years of probation. Miyuke Ishikawa. Miyuke Ishikawa was a Japanese midwife responsible for the deaths of numerous infants in the late 1940s during the post-war U.S. occupation of Japan. She managed a maternity home where she neglected and intentionally allowed infants, many born to impoverished unwed mothers, to die from lack of care. Alongside her husband Takeshi and a complicit doctor, Shiro Nakayama, she profited from this operation by soliciting payments from desperate parents under the pretense of finding better solutions for their unwanted children. Nakayama, the complicit doctor, even falsified death certificates to cover up the infants' deaths. In January 1948, police discovered the remains of 5 infants, triggering a wider investigation. Authorities found the ashes of over 70 more infants in a mortician's home and a temple, making the total death toll difficult to determine. Prosecutors eventually charged the couple with at least 27 murders, though 84 suspicious infant deaths were recorded at the facility between 1946 and 1948. Ishikawa and her husband were found guilty of 5 murders by omission and received prison sentences, which were later reduced through appeals and post-war legal leniency. The case caused national outrage and spurred the legalization of abortion in Japan the following year. Amelia Sach and Annie Walters. Amelia Sach and Annie Walters, known as the Finchley baby farmers, were British women who murdered over a dozen infants in the early 1900s. Sach ran something called a lying-in home, which is just a maternity home where women could go give birth out of the public eye. There, she charged pregnant women, mostly unwed servants, for childbirth and supposed adoptions. In reality, there were no adoptive families. Walters would instead take the newborns and poison them shortly after birth. Their crimes were discovered when Walters' suspicious landlord, a police officer, reported her. At trial, the insane number of baby clothes found at Sach's home was used as evidence of the scale of their killings. Both women were hanged in 1903. Junko Ogata. Junko Ogata, once a mild-mannered preschool teacher, became the accomplice to one of Japan's most sadistic serial killers, Futoshi Matsunaga. Under his influence, she took part in the brutal torture and murders of at least 7 people, including her own family members, between 1996 and 1998. Matsunaga's psychological and physical abuse twisted her into a willing participant in his reign of terror. Initially sentenced to death in 2005, Ogata's punishment was later reduced to life in prison, after the court acknowledged the extreme control Matsunaga had over her. Despite this, many remain divided on whether she was a victim or a willing monster in the horrors that unfolded. Kate and Kit Kelly. The Kelly family was a notorious group of American serial killers who operated in the 1880s in a place called No Man's Land, which is just the Oklahoma Panhandle. The group was comprised of William Kelly, the husband/father, his wife Kate, their son Bill, and their daughter Kit. The family ran a tavern and would lure wealthy travelers, and I know this sounds very similar to another entry from an earlier tier, but it is a different story entirely. It's very weird how similar it is, but it is different. Over the span of several months in 1887, they killed 11 people. Kate, the matriarch, was primarily responsible for getting the victim in position. And what I mean by that is after they would get into the tavern, she would prepare their meal and sit them at a specific spot at the table. I'm assuming it's a table, but it's a specific spot that was set up by a trap door. Once the victim fell through the trap, they would either die from the impact or the Kelly family would then use an axe. Kit Kelly had a few roles. She would engage with the victim and would also help dispose of their bodies. So maybe these women didn't swing the axe. We have no way of knowing for sure, but I do consider these women serial killers. They were a part of taking multiple lives. The Kellys were able to evade suspicion for a little while, but the disappearance of several travelers in this same section that just happened to be around their tavern raised some red flags. In December 1887, a traveler entered the inn and was struck by this horrendous odor. He went on to investigate this foul odor, the start to every horror film, and discovered the decomposing bodies of 3 men in the cellar. This led to an investigation, and that investigation led to the discovery of several more bodies, as well as a bloody axe, which was the presumed murder weapon. It was actually vigilantes who went after the Kelly family, and it was a pretty lengthy chase that they had. When the vigilantes finally caught up with the Kelly family, I guess Kate Kelly's horse tripped and she fell off and then died from the impact. Bill and Kit were captured and then hanged. William had a brief escape but was then caught. He confessed and then was also hanged. Darya Nikolayevna Saltykova. Darya Nikolayevna Saltykova was a Russian noblewoman and serial killer, and is widely regarded as one of the most notorious women murderers in Russian history. She is infamous for torturing and killing her serfs in the 1760s and 1770s. She would physically abuse them, starve them, whip them, just horrendous amounts of torture, and it's really not known the exact number of victims, but it is believed that she killed well over 100 people, mostly young women. Her cruelty went unchecked for many years due to her noble status, and it wasn't until 1768, when rumors of her cruelty began to spread, that she finally was investigated. I believe around the same time, or maybe this is what sparked the rumors, but one of her victims managed to escape and went on to report her. Saltykova was arrested, and in 1775, after a trial, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. She spent the rest of her life in confinement and died in 1801. Leonarda Cianciulli. Finally, we have Italian serial killer Leonarda Cianciulli. My grandmother is rolling in her grave at my poor pronunciation of that. She was also known as the soap maker of Goreggio. Born in 1894, she led a pretty tragic life and suffered many miscarriages and also the death of many of her children, which made her fiercely protective of her only surviving son, Giuseppe. In 1939, after learning that he was joining the Royal Army during World War II, Leonarda lost it. She became obsessed with keeping him safe. A fortune teller's prediction that all of her children would die young fueled Leonarda's belief that human sacrifices were necessary to keep her son safe. This led to Leonarda murdering 3 women, all of whom were her neighbors, all of whom were poisoned, and she would go on to mutilate their bodies. Leonarda's first victim was a spinster who was just looking for some help finding a husband, and Leonarda lured her into her home with the promise of a marriage opportunity. Instead, Leonarda took her life with an axe. She dismembered the body and then dissolved the remains in caustic soda and made tea cakes from the dried blood. She would then serve those tea cakes to her guests. She would eat them herself, and she would even serve them to her son. Her second victim was killed and disposed of in a similar manner after being promised a job. Like the others, her final victim was killed and her body dissolved, but Leonarda decided to use her body fat to make soap. soap that she would go on to distribute to her neighbors. As if killing her victims wasn't bad enough, the worst thing you could possibly do, she also stole any money they had, jewels, etc. Leonarda's murders were finally found out when one of the victim's sisters reported her missing. After a police investigation, Leonarda was arrested. She initially denied the murders, but then after police were like, oh, then it, has to be your son, she quickly changed her tune and admitted that it was her. During her trial, she showed absolutely no remorse. She even was correcting the prosecutor on the details of her crimes, which is a really interesting way to handle your trial, but I digress. She was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. She died in 1970 at the age of 76 after suffering a stroke. Obviously, the heinous details, the craziness of this case made it infamous in Italy, and many believe that the true extent of her crimes may have never been fully realized. Regardless, 3 victims or 300, she remains one of the most infamous women serial killers in history. And that is it for the women serial killer Iceberg. I am so glad we have made it through this. I appreciate you for sticking around. I hate saying I hope you enjoyed this video when it's obviously very dark, but I think you get what I mean. Like I said at the beginning, I do have quite a variety of videos. I focus mostly on like pop culture stuff. Definitely a lot more lighthearted content. If you need a little pick-me-up, feel free to check those out, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.